Hello, I'm John Molesky, and this is Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Joining me today is Akbar Ahmed. Akbar is the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University and is also a global fellow with the Wilson Center's Asia program. Ambassador Ahmed previously served as Pakistan's High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland. Also with us, Michael Kugelman. Michael is the South Asia Institute Director with that same Wilson Center Asia program. Michael also writes monthly columns for Foreign Policy's South Asia channel. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As our alert viewers might guess, we are going to be talking about Pakistan and the so-called political crisis. And that's where I want to start, gentlemen. In this age of multiple crises around the world, it's a bit of an overused term. So I want to ask you how you would characterize the political situation in Pakistan. Is crisis a word that comes to mind? Akbar, let's begin with you.
John, I think it is a genuine crisis. Pakistan, of course, is famous for so many crises upon crises. I recall an early book called Crisis Upon Crisis, some sort of title that indicates the sequence of crises that Pakistan has faced. But this one, to me, is very, very serious because, to me, the nation of Pakistan now has a clear choice. It must decide whether it wants democracy, the constitution, respect for law, human rights, women's rights, minority rights, all the things that its founder, Mr. Jinnah Quaid-e-Azam, wanted for Pakistan. If you see his and hear his early speeches, which are recorded, or then alternatively, another bout of authoritarian government, which may lead to martial law, which may lead to further disasters and catastrophes, as inevitably it has happened in the past. And you're seeing this, John, for me, in some of the most very disturbing images, I must say, as an overseas Pakistani living in Washington as an American, but also with Pakistani roots, where I see women being dragged, pulled by the hair, caught by the hair, and dragged on the streets. Now, this is completely against Pakistani culture, and it's shocked Pakistanis. And then, of course, we have those very gruesome images of people attacking the Corps commander's house, going into his house, and that young man who's a bit like the shaman who attacked on 6th January, attacked Capitol Hill, and came out came into the building, if you remember, wearing Viking helmet and some kind of thing he was carrying, and he became an instant celebrity. And this young man was coming out to the Corps commander's house with a peacock in his hand, and he said to the camera, he said, "I have gone into this house. The general had stolen this peacock. I've stolen it back." Now that, John, to me, as a scholar observing the scene there, is really a breakdown of authority on a very frightening scale.
Thanks, Akbar. Michael, you know, a sober analyst like you may not be as loose with words like crisis as a media person like me is when we're always looking for shorthand. Is that a fair assessment?
No, absolutely. I'm very confident using the word crisis. And one reason for that is that Pakistan is actually experiencing a series of crises, serious crises playing out at the same time. Akbar has very eloquently laid out the political crisis that Pakistan is experiencing. But at the same time that this is all happening, there's also a really severe economic crisis. Pakistan is just a few weeks away, potentially, from a default. It could experience a total economic meltdown. And I think that amplifies just how troubling the political crisis is, because all of the things happening on the political front are making it difficult, if not impossible, for the political leadership to address this really severe economic stress that's playing out in the country right now. And you combine that with the fact that there's been a resurgence in terrorist attacks in Pakistan over the last year or two. And meanwhile, we've forgotten about it by now. Pakistan is still trying to recover from the catastrophic flooding that hit the country nearly a year ago. So those are four crises that I've identified, all happening at the same time.
Not to mention the whole world's still a bit of a pandemic hangover.
Absolutely.
Crises on top of crises. Well, gentlemen, not to be alarmist, but how concerned should we be? You know, there are the humanitarian issues, but we're talking about a nuclear nation here, right? We're not just talking about any nondescript nation. This is a significantly powerful military.
John, I think it's important to remind our viewers, and I'm glad you're doing it, that Pakistan is an important country in its own right. It's a major country in terms of the Muslim world, and it does have a great following in the Muslim world. But think of it, it's almost 235 to 240 million people. As you reminded us, it's nuclear. It's in a geopolitical situation, which is crucial in terms of Asia, in terms of, and then this whole great power rivalry. Just think of it. China on one side, India on the other side, Russia to the north. It's at a critical, situated at a critical phase and able to play a role, a negative role, positive role, but certainly a role. And most important to me, most important is the fact that Pakistan was founded by Mr. Jinnah, who gave a model of a modern democratic nation with rights for every gender, minority, and so on. That is the model that I believe Pakistanis have in the back of their heads. And that is what gives me hope that in the midst of this crisis and chaos, you'll see Pakistanis again and again wanting democracy, holding on to that path. I think that's a very important thing to recognize.
I'm going to come back to that in a moment, Akbar. But Michael, first I want to ask you about, Akbar mentioned the regional neighbors. What is the perspective from India? Even in the best of times, there are tension between these two nations. I looked in some of the newspaper reports out of India, and I see the word civil war or the threat of civil war as it relates to Pakistan looming large in many of the headlines. What's the perspective from India?
Well, I don't want to overgeneralize because there's not one single perspective. There's multiple perspectives, though. I think that certainly one perspective that I've picked up on is a sense of, quite frankly, Schadenfreude, this idea that, oh, well, it's about time that Pakistan suffer given how it's made us, meaning India, suffer over the years. It's an unfortunate perspective, but that's one side. That does not define the perspective on the whole in India. I would argue that in New Delhi, so clearly, I mean, what's happening in Pakistan is being monitored, but I think that the broader conclusion in India is that what is happening in Pakistan is concerning, but it's not something that should impact India in a very big way. And I think that for India, for several years now, its main regional or neighborhood concern has been China. India now views China as its biggest strategic concern, its biggest strategic threat as well. Because of the border tensions and because of China's growing presence and footprint around the broader region. But I think that any sound mind would conclude that if you border India, if you border Pakistan, and if Pakistan were to experience the sustained levels of unrest, and even if there was to be indications of economic meltdown, economic collapse, and even the risk of state collapse, that's an obvious worst case scenario. Obviously, there would have to be some degree of concern across the border because it is across the border. But I think the bottom line perspective now in New Delhi is that this is something for Pakistan to work out on its own. We're certainly not going to help. No reason for us to get involved. And if all goes well, whatever happens in Pakistan will not impact us, meaning India.
I want to ask both of you your thoughts on the meaning of the arrest of Imran Khan and what we can take away from that and his subsequent release on bail, thanks to the Supreme Court. He appeared on CNN this weekend with Fareed Zakaria. And one of the things he said is simply, bluntly, there is no rule of law in Pakistan currently, according to the former prime minister. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on the arrest, what it foretells, and where it's going to go from here?
Well, John, the arrest we all saw on television, which was shocking, again, because of the very nature. You have a former prime minister, whether you agree with him or not agree with him, the fact is that he's a former prime minister. And the way he was captured, literally, there were dozens of soldiers all armed to the teeth. They barged in, they smashed the windows, they apparently hit him on the head, then they dragged him away. And that is not a good sign for any democracy. And it really reflects on the state of affairs right now in Pakistan. Now, simultaneously, there's a very interesting phenomena taking place, that the more the government or the administration seems to be suppressing Imran Khan as a phenomena, his popularity with people seems to grow. So the more he's suppressed, the greater this popularity. And now it's reached a global level. He was always a well-known international celebrity, but now you've got 24 congressmen writing from America to that he should be treated with respect and so on. Democracy must be returned to Pakistan. You've got heads of state in the Muslim world making statements. So it's a very difficult one for the government. I believe the only solution is for the administration to sit with him and his party, declare a date for elections, hold the elections, and whoever wins, then let that person deal with the problems of Pakistan. And hopefully, as Michael has pointed out, the four crises must be tackled by the new government. But if this continues, then it seriously will create a perpetual crisis.
Michael, if you would, as you respond to this notion of what happened with Imran Khan and whether or not there will be elections as scheduled, could you also talk explicitly about the role of the military in Pakistani politics?
Yeah, well, this political crisis now, I mean, at its roots, it's about something that's not new, and that's a case of a senior political figure who had a good relationship with the military and then had a falling out, resulting in the military trying to take efforts to sideline them. This is not a new thing. I mean, we've seen this. There's so many examples that one can point to Nawaz Sharif, the brother of the current prime minister, who saw his relations with the military go south on various occasions. Certainly, you could look at Benazir Bhutto. You could certainly look at her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. So, on one level, what's playing out in Pakistan today is not unprecedented. Unfortunately, even the terrible levels of repression that we're seeing, including, as Akbar was describing it, the horrific treatment of women. This is not new. It's happened many times in the past in Pakistan's political history. But what's a bit different today is that Khan is not a typical pedestrian Pakistani political figure. He does have a lot of charisma. He has mass popularity. And that sort of is reminiscent of a Benazir or a Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. These are figures that have not been around for quite some time. So that's why that doesn't make this situation unprecedented, but it's something that hasn't come about for quite some time. And also, Khan is someone who is not backing down. Many times in the past, when political figures face these pressures from the state, they eventually give in. They let themselves be arrested. They turn themselves in. But Khan, of course, he is not. He's not backing down. And it is also quite notable that very soon after he was arrested, the Supreme Court indeed weighed in and said that his arrest was unlawful. And that was very striking for many, given that there's been this narrative that the state on the whole is going after Khan. But it appears that the Supreme Court, at least, is sympathetic to the way in which he was arrested, which it viewed as unlawful, the way it was done. Paramilitary forces barging into to the High Court building in Islamabad and forcefully taking him away. But in terms of the role of the military, it's interesting that the previous army chief in Pakistan had said on his way out that the army was no longer going to be involved in politics. And there's a long history of that in Pakistan. The army chief has arguably been the most powerful political figure in Pakistan. So the previous army chief on his way out said that the army is not going to be involved in politics. But given what's been playing out over the last few months, suggests that it is very much still involved in politics. And my own view is that the way in which Khan was arrested suggested that was the work of the army. The fact that these were paramilitary forces, they were not police officers that arrested him. The fact that he was arrested just a few days after he repeated earlier allegations he had made, blaming a senior military officer for being complicit in his assassination attempt. So I think that the military is on the back foot in Pakistan, in the sense that because Khan is so popular, he's brought out this narrative that the army leadership was behind his arrest, our military figures were behind his assassination attempt. That's put the military on the defensive in ways that it hasn't been for quite some time. And that's another reason why this crisis is a bit different from previous ones, just because the military is in such a defensive position right now.
In addition,
John, I want to pick up on that point.
Yes,
Michael is absolutely right. This is one of the first times, and this is why this crisis is so dangerous, one of the first times that the Punjab province, which is the most populous and the most powerful province of Pakistan, the army comes from the Punjab. Political power is largely in the Punjab, so is economic power. Now, for the first time, we are seeing Punjabis turning against the army, which is literally their own army. This did not happen even in 1971 when Pakistan broke apart. And this is very, very worrying. So you have this larger-than-life figure, Imran Khan, who's constantly saying, I'm not against the army, I respect the army, etc., etc. At the same time, you have the people now so riled up, so worked up that they are attacking the army, abusing the army. And a lot of this is now, we are living in the age of social media. A lot of this is the social media. So for the first time, the army has become a target. And this is something, this is literally uncharted waters for Pakistanis. who always had respect for the army, and they looked up to the army.
So I want to circle back to Akbar, your positive note, your optimistic note of earlier, where even in the darkest times, you're looking ahead and you invoked the vision of Jinnah to say that there might be simmering in the background this white noise of a desire for greater democratic resurgence. Talk to us about how that happens. If both of you would tell us how that happens, especially when you ladle on top things like the potential of a default. We sit in the United States right now where a deal has not yet been struck in the US on the debt limit. And so this nation is also facing a potential catastrophic default. How does a country move forward in the midst of a political crisis when the other wheels of government may be grinding to a halt as a result of the economics?
Well, John, analyze it. What is holding Pakistan together? There's a sense of nationalism, but again, you're seeing it's fractured. There's a sense of law and order. Again, you're seeing major crises. We've been talking about it. So one of the very few factors that holds Pakistan together is the persona and the symbol of Mr. Jinnah. So I've served in Balochistan, in the frontier province, in Punjab, in what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. And everywhere, Jinnah had a cementing, a gluing effect. People respected him, they looked up to him. So I believe that presence of Jinnah in the national psyche will be a factor that will continue to hold Pakistanis together and constantly draw Pakistanis towards this notion of a democratic Pakistan, because there are many statements of Jinnah saying that this country must be democratic, it must care for the poor, the vulnerable, the women in society, the minorities in society. Again and again and again, he emphasized the vulnerability of ordinary Pakistanis. And he pointed out that Pakistan is not made for the rich, not for the corrupt, not for the people who believe in nepotism. And of course, Pakistanis will point out that that is precisely what didn't happen. That is why we have a crisis, because the elite has always been corrupt and they've been using nepotism for getting top jobs and so on. So all these factors have played, and that is one of the reasons why Imran's, if you like, revolt, his awakening the masses, has touched a raw nerve. So Pakistanis have these very high hopes that somehow all these problems will be solved and Jinnah's Pakistan will magically come back if we are able to resolve this crisis.
Akbar, thank you, as always, over the years of making something out of my rambling question with a terrific answer. Michael, I think I can be more concise when I ask it a second time to you. Essentially, what does a path forward look like?
Well, I think that ideally you would need some type of internal reconciliation. You would need to develop a dialogue between the conflicted factions, which would be the political leadership and the army leadership on the one side, and then the opposition on the other side. But I'm afraid that the moment is simply too polarized to assume that could be realistic. There had been, not long before Khan was arrested, there had been some rounds of talks between opposition leaders and members of the government. And they were discussing one of the broader issues at play in this crisis, and that's when the dates of several provincial elections, when they should happen. But I think that given what's happened since then, the arrest of Khan, and more recently, what we're seeing is, in my view, a wholesale effort by the Pakistani leadership to weaken, if not dismantle altogether, Khan's party, to the point that at this point in time, much of the senior party leadership, Khan's party leadership, is in jail. And we're also seeing this trend of leaders of his party announcing that they're resigning from the PTI, and they're doing that because they're under pressure by the state to do that. So that suggests that we could get to a point where there is no other side, so to speak. So even if there was talk about different sides coming to the table, the opposition won't have a side because it's been it's people are in jail or people have gotten out of politics. That suggests the possibility of maybe some type of external actor that should try to mediate this mess and try to help the sides reach a resolution. There'd been some reports that the UAE, which is a close partner of Pakistan, would be willing to jump into the fray. The UAE in the past has mediated tensions between Pakistan and India, but based on these credible reports, the UAE had it put itself out there to suggest it would be willing to mediate, but the Pakistani side and specifically the army leadership was not interested. So I don't know what to say. I hate not to leave this on an optimistic note, but all I could say is that hopefully time will be a healer, and there could be a very difficult few weeks and few months, but eventually, hopefully cooler minds will prevail, and someone will jump out there and be willing to to bring some type of resolution to this very troubling crisis.
Michael, in relation to your point, there are reports in the social media, and I'm trying to keep up to date with what's happening there, so I follow these reports fairly carefully. Imran is making very positive responses. He's actually saying, I'm ready to talk and I'm ready to move ahead. I'm not against the army and so on. So there are suggestions that there's some kind of dialogue taking place behind the scenes, and that may result in something, because I think Pakistanis have been shaken with the events of the last few weeks, and everyone realizes that if the structure collapses, everyone gets affected, particularly the ruling, the power elite. And that, I think, is the best wake-up call for them to get serious and pull back from the precipice.
How important is it that elections happen on a reasonable schedule in order for this to start to trend in a more positive direction?
Absolutely crucial, John. Without that, there's no way out. Elections have to happen. And that's, as Michael pointed out, is one of the reasons why they may be trying to weaken Imran Khan's party. But elections must take place in whatever condition, and dates must be given, and they must be honored. Very important, not just take place, but must be honored, and the government allowed. Remember, the crisis in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, began when elections took place in 1970. Mujibur Rahman won the elections, that is the Bengal party, the National Party, and West Pakistanis, the power elite, did not give him the government. They preferred to use military rule to try to hold the country together and negate the election. So that is a dangerous precedent, avoiding the results of an election. Election must take place. Let the winner, whoever the winners, take the spoils and run the country. Very, very important. Psychologically, it's a huge looming crisis for Pakistan, but that has to be resolved.
Michael, final thought.
And if I may, I agree with Akbar that elections have to be the way forward, and these are constitutionally mandated elections. I mean, they're scheduled to happen in October of this year, so it's not like we're talking about early elections. But I think the issue is, would the government be willing to hold them, given that the basic issue here is that the government fears that if there were elections and Khan were allowed to run in them, he would likely win because of how popular he is and how unpopular the party is. So this is why the government could well try to arrest him again, could try to build up a case to get him disqualified from public office. So there's those things to think about. And very briefly, picking up what Akbar said, that is very encouraging that Khan maybe is interested in some type of dialogue. But the question is, would anyone be willing to talk to him high up in power? That's the question. There's indications that the powers that be simply want him to be out of the political scene, which would be very unfortunate, and that would mean that these efforts, this outreach on his part, could be for naught if the civilian and military leadership are not interested in talking to him. I hope I'm wrong, though.
And Michael, more ominous, and I hope it doesn't ever happen, but Imran has been constantly saying, he's pleading, he's desperately issuing a call to the world that there are assassination attempts afoot and that he may be the victim of an assassination. And that would be very, very serious. All hell could break loose. So I hope these are all considerations that the power elite in Pakistan takes into account and tries to remain very much on the democratic path, hold elections, hand over power, and whoever takes over, support them so that Pakistan is more stable and is able to get on with this business of an ordinary life for Pakistanis.
Well, there is no neat, tidy package for us to tie this up in, gentlemen. This is an ongoing crisis, and we can hope for the best, and we can be grateful to both of you for helping us sort through what is a really complex situation. Akbar Ahmed, Michael Kugelman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and that you'll join us again soon. And we promise, as this story develops, we'll be on it again. Until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Milewski. Thanks for your time and interest.